Welcome to The Liquidity Event, a show about all things personal finance with a laser focus on taxes, financial independence, and equity compensation. Hosted by AJ and Shane of Brooklyn FI, each episode will focus on a personal finance topic, some driven by news headlines and sometimes driven by listener questions. And sometimes you'll just get two money nerds rambling about what they think is interesting. Just a quick note before we get started, this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered tax or investment advice.
Welcome to the Liquidity Event. We're your hosts, AJ, with special guest Charlotte Cowles. And this is episode 106, being recorded on June 5th, airing on June 7th. A quick reminder for you listeners, we will answer your questions on the pod if you leave us a message. You can disguise your voice and use a fake name if you're shy. The link is memo.fm/the liquidity event. Welcome to the Liquidity Event, Charlotte. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's funny. We've been friends and in each other's social orbit for a long time, but have been meeting with more frequency recently, just to chat about what's going on in the money world. I'd love to hear. So Charlotte, for those who don't know, is the personal advice columnist for The Cut at New York Magazine, and also is a freelance writer. Your work's been published in the New York Times and a few other places folks may or may not have heard of. But Charlotte, I'd love to hear, how does one become the personal advice columnist for New York Magazine?
Yeah, personal finance advice.
Personal finance advice. Yes.
Sort of well, first of all, when I first got this assignment back in 2016, it was I had just started freelancing, and it was from my old boss at New York Magazine, who I had worked for years. Who said that they were trying to kind of venture more into the women and money, advice / just opening up that conversation. And it might be hard to remember back then in the Stone Ages, but that conversation wasn't really happening anywhere near as much as it's happening now. That was before Me Too. It was before a lot of conversations about the wage gap. Obviously people knew that was happening, but it wasn't being discussed as widely, and women weren't talking as openly about their money as it has now become much more acceptable to do. So at the time, my boss was like, look, I remember when you worked here, you always had a lot of ideas that sort of had to do with money as a topic and how it was taboo and how it really factored into people's lives in ways that they didn't know how to talk about, and created this conflict. And, it was just sort of a rich topic. And a lot of those ideas never went anywhere because that was, even years before that, and we weren't really sure what to do with them. But she was like, I just remember you kind of being interested in that. And so I was wondering if you would be open to doing a column about it for us. Obviously, I am not a personal finance expert, still am not, and definitely was not then. So the idea was that but I am a journalist, so I report out my answers to these questions. And when I was first starting out, I literally just looked up people's names and reached out to them who were, big deals in the financial industry, and reached out to them and was like, hey, can you explain exactly how a 401k works? Which was a tremendous waste of these people's time. But a lot of them were kind enough to do it. And that's how I made my first contacts with people like Sally Krawcheck and, other big names in the financial industry who have really been kind enough to share a lot of their knowledge with me over the years as I've, when I've reached out to them again about with other questions. But another thing that I did was send a huge email to pretty much all of my friends being like, hey, what are your money concerns? What are the things that you worry about with your finances? What are the things that you wish you could talk about, but you can't find answers for? What's going on? And then I just took all their answers and I dumped them in a big Google Doc.
And that was your column for the last 8 years, and here we are.
Literally. But it went through stuff like, one of my friends was like, I had a terrible eating disorder for years and now I can't get life insurance because of it. Like I need all this dental work done because of this terrible eating disorder and like I can't afford it. Things that like are really, really deep and painful, and that they like truly, you can't like take that question to a financial advisor. You know what I mean? And, another friend, like, this was when I was 30. And a lot of my friends were like starting to get married, and they were like, I always just assumed that like I would kind of like be making more money by now or have more financial stability. And I don't. And I can't even afford a wedding. And, living month to month, and all of these sort of things that have become now like these very acceptable, even like goes without saying, travails of our generation. But like back then it was really very shameful to talk about them. So that's how I started out.
Yeah. I mean, it's so needed, right? And, I'm a financial advisor. You just said, when someone has a deeply personal issue that's related to money, like where are they supposed to go? There's a therapist who can help you think through it. But therapists often give terrible financial advice, and their personal finances are often a mess anyway.
Yeah. They should not. You should not be getting your financial advice from your therapist.
Right. And then you go to your financial advisor, who hopefully you trust enough to ask them a question like that or share something. We have a lot of clients who are, trying to get pregnant or trying to, bring on a new member of their family. And like, that's definitely a financial conversation, but it's also a very emotional and personal conversation. So we do get into that a little bit. We have the luxury of being able to talk to a person one-on-one with, a confidentiality and privacy agreement in place. You don't have that luxury. Sure, there's maybe some anonymity, but, your advice or your, collecting of expert advice and writing about it is very public. Which I find so interesting because people are asking you these very personal, very specific questions, and you have to come up with an answer for them. That's, you are giving advice. Like, how do you like grapple with that? Like, how do you give that kind of deeply personal advice that thousands of people or tens of thousands of people are going to read and potentially act on? Like, how do you sleep at night? I guess is my question.
Yeah, no, totally. The answer is that I just really try to make sure that I source it really well. So I really want to make sure that I'm not asking, and this is nothing against financial influencers, many of whom are very helpful to people, but like I'm asking like people who are certified, people who have, deep training in
and practice,
whatever topic.
Right?
Yeah. And
that's my issue with influencers. Not that they're giving bad advice, is that they often are. It's just they don't have any experience with the impact of their advice. And I feel like you kind of share that with financial advisors, because I'm sure people write back to you and comment, and you get an actual feedback loop of the advice that you give.
Right. And I think that what I do that is different from a lot of advice that people might find in other parts of the internet, or, even from a standard financial advisor is, and this is honestly, this comes down to like what keeps me interested in this topic overall, is that I understand that people are doing their best, but without a doubt, people will always know what they're supposed to be doing with their money, and they can understand that objectively, and they still will not always be able to do it. And I get that, and I have a lot of empathy for that. I think anybody who doesn't agree with that is either lying or delusional. Like, people always know what they're supposed to be doing, and they never actually do it. And
right.
Sometimes they can do it, but it's not like that's the entire field of behavioral economics. Like, people are not quants. The ideal human behavior, like, people don't actually behave that way. So.
And are you talking about like a simple behavior as simple of a behavior as spend less money than you make and save 20% of your income? Like these like super simple, basic financial principles, even if you know nothing about money or nothing about finance, like we have common sense. Like, if you have a job, you're educated, like, you know what you're like, I love that. Like, you know what you're supposed to be doing. Sometimes you can't do it because you have a spending problem, or you've been to 16 weddings this year, or maybe wages just haven't caught up to you and it's actually not mathematically possible for you to live in the city that you have to be in for your job and pay your rent and support your family. So,
right.
What a fun time to be alive. And
totally. But also I think that, like, I always look at, like, what value I can add, and, like, you can get financial advice, even quite good financial advice, on Reddit. You can get it from Googling anything. Like, the answers are out there, but you might not always get sort of like the empathy and the humanity that actually is deeply part of how we treat our money. And so that's what I really try to bring into the advice, is really, like, giving people the benefit of the doubt and being like, look, sometimes this is really hard. Behavior is really difficult to modify. Everyone knows that you should spend less than you make, but it's never quite that simple.
Totally. Do you ever find yourself just being like, man, like, I can't believe I have to write about this shit today? Like, is there ever anything that, like, sends you over the edge where you're like, come on, like, pull it together? And, like, I guess, like, what are the scenarios where you're like, okay, lady, or insert person, like, you know the answer here, like, I'm just gonna lay it, like I guess, like, what are some columns where you can, like, feel your own frustration coming through versus, like, giving good advice?
I usually don't respond to those, just because, like, it's like, what value am I adding? But I think that the question that I get a lot, that I wish I never had to get, but I get these emails all the time, are like, I lent my boyfriend money and we're broken up and he won't pay me back. And I'm always just like, don't do that. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I have no good advice for you. You're just not going to get that money back.
Yeah.
Unless he signs some kind of promissory note, or you've got something in writing that you could take him to a small claims court for, and you're willing to take him to small claims court, and he can't actually afford to pay you back, which chances are he probably can't, then I'm sorry, you're just, like, up Schitt's Creek, and, like, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, it's like, I feel like advice, like, your position as a financial advice columnist and my position as a financial advisor is often like, why didn't you ask me before you did the thing? It's like, I did this thing. How do I fix it? And you're like, well, if you came to me before you did it, I would have advised you, yes, exactly, to have something in writing. Also, if someone needs money from you, you're probably not going to get it back because they could get it elsewhere, right? If they really needed the money for something that was viable, let's say to start a business that would have cash flow eventually, they could have gone to a bank. But they don't have any other recourse, so they're going to you and putting you in that tough position. So loaning money to friends, family, and lovers without recourse for ever getting it back. What else? What are the other things that just, like, can't be helped and you're just, like, throwing up your arms?
I mean, I think that I get a lot of questions about, like, I can't afford to go to all these weddings. And I also really have empathy for that. Like, I went through, I think the year I was like 29 or something, I went to 17 weddings in one calendar year. And I don't say that like, oh, I'm so cool and popular. It was just like literally everyone decided to get married in the same year.
Yeah.
And one of those weddings was my own. So I was also feeling broke from that. And like something I experienced that I think happens to a lot of people is that when you're just like kind of like shoveling money out the door like that, it starts to not feel real and it becomes abstract. And you're just like, you sort of just like lose the plot.
Totally.
And
yeah, it's like, let me get this rewards credit card and put this like flight to Barbados on here. Like, and you're like, what is money? I just spent $15,000 this month to go to weddings of people that I kind of like, but would have rather not gone to the wedding.
Right. Like some of these weddings are people who I literally like haven't even seen since their wedding. And I don't, looking back on that, I don't regret that. It was all like such a whirlwind. But also that was a time of my life when I was living incredibly cheaply. Like our apartment was not expensive. I didn't spend any time at home. I was either at work or at a wedding all the time. So I wasn't like that accounted for all of my vacation, all of my like eating out, pretty much all of my social time. So there were trade-offs. It didn't really feel like a trade-off. It was just sort of like, that was just that's where all of my disposable income. It was anything extra. Like I didn't even buy groceries, because I was like, either
they're feeding me at the wedding.
Work.
So
yeah.
So I have this theory. I'm curious what you think about it. So I think we're in this like giant wedding like sea change, because if you think about it, I don't think people have more friends than they did in the past, but I think that people have more friends elsewhere. Like, sure, if you grew up in a small town, you might go to 17 weddings because everyone's kind of the same age from your graduating class. But the weddings were all at the one wedding hall or one of the two wedding halls downtown. So you'd go for the weekend. You weren't traveling anywhere. But now we're all spread out. We went to college in a different state, or we're from a different state. We live in a different city. You could have friends in 17 different cities and you could be going to 17 different weddings, let alone destination weddings elsewhere. So I just think like the quantity of weddings that are expensive that are not within a 10-mile radius of where you live is just out off the charts. If you went to college, especially, because then your friends scatter all over the world. And like, our clients go through this all the time and they're like, what do I do? Like, I know you're telling me to save money, but I'm literally going to spend $100,000 on going to weddings this year, let alone my own wedding, which I'm planning for in a couple years too. So
yeah. Well, I think also people are getting married later. So they simply have more friends that they have made because they have been alive for longer. But also they do, they do have more money then to spend on weddings. Like they generally have a little more disposable income. At least I did when I was 30 than when I was 27. I think pretty much everyone does. But I will also say that when I get those questions, like, I don't want to say no. Like, I don't want to say objectively, this is a bad financial choice. Even though on paper, that's what I know that it is. I can say, hey, like, this might put you into debt. And that is objectively, it's not ideal. But also, like, you're going to do what you want to do. And at this moment in your life, these friendships might really be your priority. And so instead of being like, do this, not that, I often try to just be like, here's what you need to keep in mind if you make this decision. Like, this is what the fallout's going to be. So if you decide to do this, which it sounds like you want to do, like, it sounds like you do want to go to these 7 weddings and go to this like $4,000 bachelorette trip in Greece. Like, if you do want to do that, then like, here is what you're going to have to deal with later. So just be aware of that and be prepared to do that.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think that's so much of what financial choices are, is that it's judgment of others, right? Like, like you were saying earlier, like, what the right answer is. Like, what the right answer is. Financially, you shouldn't go, right? Yeah. That's the right answer on paper. But if you don't go, you're going to be judged by your friends for not being a part of the group or not supporting your best friend in their big decision they're making to marry this person. But you might be judged in the future by a new potential partner who says, why are you $10,000 in credit card debt? And you say, well, I had 16 weddings to go to last year and I said yes to them because I value these relationships. So, that judgment can come with money. That judgment, it's not just like a one-time thing. It's like this residual judgment of like, oh, you made that choice to do that. I think there's also a lot of judgment around like career. Like, oh, you made that choice. We get this a lot. We're accountants, right? Accountants make choices to go into accounting, not because they love accounting for the most part. They made a conservative financial choice to say, I want a stable job that's going to pay me pretty well. And they're kind of like judged.
Relatively recession proof. Yeah. Well, yes, I agree that there is like fear and anticipation of judgment, but there's also like, I think a real desire, and especially after the pandemic, to be like, well, what else am I like? This is what money is for, like, am I just going to like die with all my money in 5 years? Or like, I'd rather like sort of spend my money on things that are important to me and really enjoy my life, then, like, cool, I'll be able to retire, but I won't have any friends. Like I really like, and even looking back, when I was talking about going to 17 weddings, sure, some of them I like truly don't even remember. But those were the ones, I should also say, that we, took a train to, and like, it wasn't like I was flying across the world. The ones that did cost a lot of money were like really memorable. And I, even made friends at some of these weddings. Like, I have met and made good friends on bachelorette parties. Like, I don't know if you can come up with like a money value for that, but it's not just that I was like dumping money out the door with and like didn't get a lot of value out of it too.
I met my husband at a wedding.
That.
So
really? There you go. Yeah.
Which ended up being a great financial decision also. So
weddings, good expense sometimes.
Sometimes, asterisk, right. And that's the thing. What we always joke in financial advice, it's like, it depends. Like, what's the answer here? Of course it depends on everyone's individual situation. When we talk about weddings, bachelorette parties, yes, of course, bachelor parties are expensive too. But I feel like this is sort of a somewhat uniquely like woman problem. Like, women have to go to these weddings. We have to buy the stupid... Sorry, I don't mean to say stupid, but there's my judgment about bridesmaid dresses. I feel it. If you want me to buy a dress that I don't want to buy, like, I'm going to judge you. And if it costs $300 or $400, I'm really going to judge you. Do you think you've been writing about money? You've been talking to people about money for almost 10 years now. Do you think it's harder for women to build wealth than it is for men?
Oh, of course. Like, that's just like objectively true. Women make less money. They're under different expectations. They are, they're socialized and conditioned to not ask for as much. And they're often stigmatized if they don't spend money on things that are very pro-social, like, being with friends and how they look. And, there are a million reasons that are, very, very, very difficult to address for why it's more difficult for women to build wealth than it is for men. Yeah.
Yeah. We haven't even mentioned having a child and being out of the workforce or preparing physically to have a child and recovering from having a child physically and everything that comes with that. I imagine, I basically read your column every time it comes out, and you write a lot about, people who are kind of around your age, right? Millennials, people who are, kind of not in their first job necessarily, but maybe their second or third job, or maybe are changing careers. Like, in the past 8 years, have you noticed, is it getting better or is it getting worse for quote unquote our generation?
It's really hard to say. No, I know the answer to that. It is actually getting better, but people are complaining more. And I don't want to like say that in a way that sounds judgy. I think that like everyone has a right to complain, first of all. But secondly, I think that like the sort of easing of stigma of talking about money has like brought out a lot of people's anxieties about it. And I think also like, I think there's a lot of different factors at play. I think that everybody likes to talk about like, oh, social media makes everyone feel like they have to keep up with the Joneses. But I do think that social media preys on people's insecurities about how well they're doing in comparison to others. And so I think that a lot of people feel like they're doing worse than everyone else. And that feeling is very real. Like, I don't want to say that people are just like complaining for no reason. Like, that insecurity is deep and it's terrifying and it sucks. But I also think that like, it's the same reason why like the economy is like objectively doing quite well and people still feel broke. And I certainly would never argue that like people are feeling broke. Like, I get it. But also, like the numbers are good. Like unemployment is incredibly low. Millennials talk about like never being able to afford a home, but we're actually like buying homes.
We're buying homes.
Like a lot of millennials are buying homes, and, not under the best mortgage terms and not under the same conditions that our parents did, but we're comparing ourselves to our parents. And we wanted different things. Like we were the generation that valued experiences over material objects. And we were the generation that graduated into a gigantic housing crisis. And so for us, like for me in my 20s, like buying a home was like the very bottom of my priority list. Whereas for our parents, it was something that they strove for. Anyway, I'm kind of talking myself in knots. But,
no, I like it. I mean, don't you think it's also our previous generations, like they chose security because they wanted to provide for our generation, and they did, and they gave us unlimited choices and optionality. I mean, that's like, or the privilege to choose what career you went into, right? And then when you have freedom, you want to use it. So settling down at 23 was not, at least in my friend group, was not on the table for anyone. It was, in fact, it was toxic, right? Why would I settle down? I have more grad school to go to. I have 7 careers ahead of me before I, make a choice to go after income specifically to provide for a family or start a family. So
I think also like people kind of like act like baby boomers were like came out of the womb like this stodgy generation, but like they were around in this like the 60s and 70s were a very like pleasure seeking time. Like they sowed their wild oats too, and now they love to talk about how responsible they are and how irresponsible we are. But like, I was interviewing a psychologist recently, and he was like, younger people are always more pleasure seeking. That is how their brains work. And that has been the case since like human brains have been studied. And over time, they like, they no longer are as pleasure seeking in the same sort of like hedonistic way. But they love to judge younger people and call them stupid. So like,
because they have more time on their hands. Like, that's all it is.
And it's also just like, it's truly like how your brain develops. Like you just are like a little more crotchety, and that's fine. That's how humans work.
Totally.
But I just like, that's kind of why I always like roll my eyes at this, like these like generational conflicts. And I'm just like, whatever. This is also just like how age happens to progress, how it works for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Earlier you said something about like, being judged for like your financial choices. And about 6 months ago, was it 6 months ago? You wrote this, what I thought was a very brave and powerful piece about something you went through personally in your own financial life. And you wrote about it. And it was a day where you got scammed. You fell for a scam, and you detailed all of the nitty-gritty details for all of your readers. Tell me about that. I just thought it was, when I read that, I was like, and I also know you. That was also crazy. Like reading this, I was like, I know Charlotte, and she's so smart. Like, how did this happen? But as I was reading it, I was like, yep, I get it. Tell us what happened and like kind of where you're at 6 months after the fact, kind of reconciling how you feel about it.
Yeah. It was one of the worst days of my life, but to try, I mean, it took many thousands of words to kind of go through all the different steps of what happened. But the long and short of it is I was scammed by someone over the phone. It started off as like a very sort of routine Amazon customer service call that was very convincing. And then it devolved into someone impersonating someone from the federal government, 2 different people from impersonating federal government officers who told me that my family was in danger, knew a lot of personal information about me, had my social security number, had my address, had the names of my family members, including my son, my parents, my brother. And it was truly terrifying. And it culminated, again, looking back, it's just like unthinkable to me that I would do this, but it culminated with me. They told me that someone was coming to my home, to help me secure assets because all of my assets would be frozen. So I had to go to the bank and withdraw as much cash as I could so that it wouldn't be frozen and I would be able to live off of it. I keep a pretty high amount of cash in savings because I'm a freelancer and also because I have to pay my own quarterly taxes. So I had over $50,000 worth of cash in the bank, and I took it out, and I was told to put it in a shoebox, write down a bunch of information on it, and give it to someone who came to my home. And again, I know it sounds ludicrous. And like after it happened, I was just like, how the fuck did that happen? Like, I truly couldn't believe it. It felt like I'd been like in a trance or hypnotized in some way. But afterwards, when I decided I wanted to write about it and report on it, and I interviewed a number of other people who've been scammed. And as soon as I started talking about it, like literally things came out of the woodwork. Like it turns out a friend of a friend had been scammed out of $450,000. Like $50,000 is a lot of money, but like 450,000
it's like someone's life savings. Yeah.
Yeah. And another money advice columnist had been scammed out of, I think it was like $10,000 a few years earlier. And I started talking to people who research scams, psychologists, economists, people who work for large think tanks. And one thing that I found out that was really interesting was that they did a study of hundreds of people who had been targeted by scammers, some of whom had lost money and some of whom had not managed to extricate themselves. And the biggest differentiators between the people who did not lose money and the people who did was not education level. It wasn't financial savvy. It wasn't, how much money they had or how much money they didn't have. It was literally if they had heard of a similar scam before. And so that was when I was like, I have to write about this. Like,
yeah, you have to. Can you prevent 100,000 people from doing that, like from experiencing this?
This might literally be like the biggest impact that
you'll ever have. Yeah, for sure.
And And the other reason that I wanted to write about it was that they've also studied the aftermath of people getting scammed. And not only is it financially devastating to lose any amount of money, but, it was devastating to lose $50,000. Like that was awful. But for a lot of people, the emotional fallout is so crippling. Like they suffer, and I can relate to this too, like extreme anxiety, like horrible guilt, sleeplessness, depression, like just it really psychologically takes a toll. And so I wanted to also share, because I think a lot of people are so embarrassed and so deeply ashamed, and they don't know how to talk about it, and they feel like they can't. And so knowing that they aren't alone can be really powerful.
Yeah. I mean, it was just so incredibly brave that you were able to talk about it. I hope it was at least like therapeutic for you and your own recovery from that shame and just trying to get past it. Cause like shit happens, it didn't ruin your life. Yeah. Probably worst day of your life. Maybe. It also sounded like, you have a young son at home, and that's a threat to the security and safety of your family. I'm sure you've done research on this. Like I'm sure there's, experienced folks who are well trained in how the mind works to try to get to you and to try to get you to a place of fear where you will agree to something crazy that you on a normal day you would have been like, are you kidding me? Get out of, hang up. But you're like, wait, totally. My son is in danger? Of course. What do you need? Like, let me help you. Yeah.
Like, do you also want my passport and social security?
What do you need? Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think, and my takeaway from the whole process of kind of like looking into it and talking to a lot of people was that I don't think that my scam would happen to anyone. Like it's not like, oh, if it happened to her, it can happen to anyone. I think that there's a scam out there for everyone. Yes. And so there are two different types of scams, roughly. One type is opportunity-based scams. So those are like, invest in this thing. This is your only chance. Or like even more cruelly, I think romance scams, like a lot of people who are lonely who fall for romance scams that turn out to be just financial scammers. Or there are threat-based scams, which are like, you owe the IRS and you're about to be arrested unless you pay up. Or in this case, it was like, your family is in danger and you need to secure this money because all of your assets are about to be frozen and you're in deep shit and you might be arrested. So, and people respond, like some people are more vulnerable to opportunity-based scams and some people are more vulnerable to threat-based scams. And I'm sure had like a million scammers try to get at me with opportunity-based scams. And I just like, that's not my particular Achilles heel. Yeah. But for me, my Achilles heel is my family and my kid. And like, they found it and they pushed on it.
Exploited it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What advice would you give for people who are kind of like, I'm reading about all these scams, I want to be informed. Yours was a particular Amazon issue. That's how they had your information. My family, we had a particular one where they targeted my grandfather and told them I was in jail and he had to go to the courthouse with $10,000. It got really far until someone else got involved. Like, what is your advice for people who are kind of paranoid, and especially for maybe helping their older parents? Like, how can you protect yourself mentally against these people who are trying to exploit and manipulate you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, first of all, to just understand that you can't entirely protect yourself. Like, your information is out there, and like tying yourself in knots to try to prevent that from happening. Like, it's out there. The internet exists, and like your social security number is probably on the dark web, and like you just have to accept that.
Right. And whether it's Ticketmaster or Target, like our information gets leaked. Like, hackers are very good at their jobs, if you want to call that a job.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain amount of like healthy paranoia to have, but you also can't like, be living your life in fear of people finding that stuff out because they probably already have it. One thing that I think is really important that I have since done with my family is, especially with AI scams, which are just like, you can't prepare for that. Like, you can't prepare for what will happen if your phone rings and it's like someone demanding ransom for your kid. But what you can do is have a family password. So if you hear, like if there's an AI generated voice of me saying that I've been kidnapped, they might be able to replicate my voice exactly, but they won't know the family password. So I've done that with my parents and my brother and my husband. My son is too little, but he will understand it when he gets older. And then other things are pretty much any time that you are given an exploding offer, you have to talk to someone else.
Yep.
And you will be terrified and you will be so worried. Like, I was told that my phones were tapped and that my apartment was being watched and that I couldn't talk to anyone else and that my computer had probably been hacked. So like so I felt like I truly, like they blocked all the exits and I felt like there was truly no one I could talk to. And like, so in some cases, like you really feel like you might not have any options. Like in my case, like I wish I had just done it anyway, but it's of course easy to say that in
hindsight, of
course.
Like,
I should have just like called my husband or called my brother or called like one of my 10 lawyer friends who would have known what to do. And I didn't. I was too scared. So anyone who makes you feel like you can't talk to anyone else,
you always can.
You always can, and you always have to. And that's the biggest gut check you can get is just to talk to someone else who you trust. And even like, I don't know, I talked to someone who studies scams, and she said she recommends that everyone have like a scam buddy who like you agree with beforehand. Like if anybody thinks that something might be a scam, like you just like check in with each other and there's no judgment.
Yep.
That might be like a little ridiculous, but it's not the worst
Sounds
idea.
Great to me.
Like if you have someone who like if you have someone who you can think of who would be a good scam buddy, then great. If that sounds like kind of absurd, then like at least just have someone in mind who you can be like, hey, am I crazy or is this weird? Yeah,
totally. I don't think it's crazy at all. I mean, we tell all of our clients, like, if you're ever like skeptical about anything, like send it to us. Like, we're very good bullshit detectors. Also in financial services, like there's scams out the wazoo. Like the IRS is like, unfortunately, I get these calls all the time. I'm sure you do too. Like, hey, it's the IRS. Like, you owe us $10,000, call us back. Or like, oh, I have records that you owe back taxes. And like, as a financial advisor, I'm like, what? Oh my God, no, I don't. I'm like, breathe, calm down. No, you don't. It's a scam. I love Scam Buddy.
The one that I get all the time is your student loans have been forgiven. Like, call us. And I just like,
I pay that off. What do you mean?
I get at this point, I get so enraged. Like when I get like, like I don't even, I mean, my phone is silenced. Like I don't take incoming calls ever. But when I get the emails, I am just like obviously I just like block and delete, report spam. We're done. But like it takes everything for me to not write back and be like, fuck you.
Yes. Well, seriously, thank you for writing that. It was shared around the world. And I think it's just so brave to just come forward and say, like, I have shame. This happened to me. It was horrible. I'm telling you my story in the hopes that it doesn't happen to you. I mean, your story is one of hundreds of thousands. Like, this happens all the time. So like, if it has happened to
millions of people, literally millions. Yeah.
Millions. Yeah. And, I think a lot of folks, it happens, for older people who don't necessarily have that scam buddy they can call, or maybe aren't as sophisticated or don't just have that much interaction. So when someone calls them, they just think it's real. So check in on your older loved things.
That is also a misnomer though, or not quite true. People under 60 are actually more likely to be scammed than people over 60. But you hear about it more. People over 60 tend to lose more money. And also you hear those stories more because it's more devastating. Like most of those people can't make it. Like, I'm in my 30s, like $50,000 is a large amount of money to me, but like I have many years of working ahead of me. I have a paycheck, like that was my emergency savings, but it was there for emergencies. And I'm sure there will come an emergency when I really wish I had that $50,000, but like it hasn't happened to me yet, and I can save money again. Whereas when someone's like 75 and that's all their retirement savings and it's gone, like that's it. That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, also there's more money to be targeted if you're an older person, and younger people, they're happy to get anything. We've seen with our clients, we've seen a lot of scams and theft with cryptocurrency. When you have something that's unregulated and there's no recourse for criminal prosecution, like, of course there's going to be more fraud and more scams. So stay safe out there, kids.
It's also when in doubt, newer, like people don't understand it as well. And so they're more likely to like kind of be like, well, I don't really know. Like maybe this is just how it works.
Yeah. And I think, yes, of course the internet is not a new thing, but we are transitioning from this period where when you wanted to get something done, you had to go in, you had to write it, you had to have your ID, you had to have a check, you had to bring your physical return back to the store. Like there was a lot, yes, things were less convenient, but there was a lot of like just standard identity checking just by the fact of you being there. Like, of course there was of course someone will always find a way around the system, but now, you can verify things online. You walk into the airport and you have your digital ID. Like, we are used to trusting companies a lot more with our data, whether it's a bank or Amazon or a yoga place, a yoga studio. Like, you are used to dealing with people you have never met before, and they're sending you an email. Like, I have given my credit card number over the phone. I had given my credit card number over email, much to my financial advisor's chagrin, and I regret that, but I did it, because it was convenient, right? And like, where do you prioritize convenience over privacy and security? So, thank you so much for sharing that story with us. Last question for you. You have a young child. I don't know if you're talking to him about money yet, but how do you plan to talk to your kid about money as someone who writes about money for a living?
That's a good question. I should probably think about that more. Right now, right now, my priorities are more like, don't throw your food on the floor.
Keep him alive.
Yeah. He's recently started saying fuck.
Okay.
So
cool.
that is something that we're working on. So I admit I haven't really
thought about it yet.
Developed a strategy for how we will talk about money with him.
Well, maybe I'll have to write into your column and we'll see what kind of answers we get.
I think that an allowance is something we'll eventually talk about, I guess. I mean, I mostly really agree with how I was raised around money, which was that it was talked about and it was never a taboo subject. And it really wasn't until I got older that I realized how unusual that was. I think a lot of households did not have the types of conversations around money that my parents did. Yeah. And also the sort of I was expected to work and earn money and to save for things. And I was given an allowance, but also expected to pay for things that I needed with that allowance. I had a clothing allowance starting when I was I think around 10 or 11, which is pretty young. And, I had to, if I needed a new pair of shoes, then that's where that money
You knew
went.
that there was a finite amount of money, which I think, you knew that it was finite. You hadn't been educated yet in income and spending in the stock market yet, but you at least knew that one pair of shoes could potentially wipe out your weekly allowance. So at least you had a feel for how much things cost. I mean, in my own family, there are stories of people going to college and getting a credit card for the first time and just being everything's free. As an 18-year-old, we can start a little bit earlier with education with our kids for sure.
Yeah, that was definitely not the case for me. But I also recognize, having those, I was also extremely lucky, I should say. My parents did not, we were comfortable. Money was not tight. So it was not a source of huge anxiety in our family. I mean, it was obviously something that people cared about, but it was, I think that for a lot of people, parents want to protect their kids from money because it is such a source of worry for them and they don't want their kids to be worried. So I think, there is a lot of complication there. And I think that I was lucky in that my parents talked about money, but also very lucky in that it was something that they felt comfortable talking about with us.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that they were able to do that. And I'm glad that you're able to share your knowledge and expertise and way of writing about money, which sucks. It sucks talking about money.
It's such a it's so not sexy. And whenever I'm well, I read about personal finance, especially because I used to work in magazines and I would go to fashion shows and interview celebrities. And so in many ways, this is not chic. But it leads to the most intimate conversations that I've ever had with people. If you ask people or if you tell people that you write and interview people about money, then they start telling you everything. And it's amazing. Yeah.
I love that.
So as a journalist and interviewer, it's pretty awesome.
That's so awesome. Are you able to share what the next project you're working on is? Is that public knowledge yet?
The book that I'm working on? Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's not a secret.
Okay.
I just haven't been I haven't been shouting it from the rooftops, but I am working on a book about lottery winners. And which is very slow going because a lot of lottery winners are very secretive, as they have every right to be, and every reason to be, I believe. So it's going very slowly, but talking to lottery winners is really fascinating. And to me, it's sort of the purest distillation of how much we judge people who have money versus people who don't. And we socialize with people who make similar amounts of money that we do. We equate it with how hard you've worked, whether you've earned it, whether you haven't. And so lottery winners have to contend with those questions on a souped up level that really is kind of the perfect lens to look at the role of money in our society today. So
I love it so much.
Topic. Yeah, it's
I'm so excited.
Going.
I'm so excited for you to write that book. And if anyone has won the lottery or knows anyone who has won the lottery, Charlotte would love to talk to you. How do people get in touch with you these days?
You can just email me. It's charlotte.cowles@gmail.com. Or if you Google me, you can find my website, and that has my email address on it too.
Yeah. I'm so excited for your book because in our business at Brooklyn FI, we work with folks who are paid an equity compensation. And some of these folks are early employees at these companies that go public, and they effectively, sometimes the numbers are so big that they effectively win the lottery overnight. They go from being a wage earner, making a nice salary, to having 7-8 figures in the bank overnight. So I think that it's a similar psychology, like you were just describing, like, okay, now I'm a very wealthy person. And there's all this like debate about, well, did you earn it because you were working there? Like, just because you happen to have worked at this tech company and not this tech company, this one went public, the one you turned a job down offer from that your friend works at, well, they're not going to be as rich as you. So you're not this new person. So I always think of the way we talk to our clients a lot about taxes and what you should do and how to like be a new person in this new kind of tax bracket is kind of similar to the conversations I've seen around lottery winners.
Yeah, it's very fraught. I don't think anyone like ever wants to feel sorry for rich people or anyone who like comes into a lot of money. But it is very jarring for a lot of people, and they don't know who they are. And when they suddenly have the ability to do a lot of things that they've never had the ability to do before. So it's interesting.
Well, cool. Well, Charlotte, thank you so much for coming on to the Liquidity Event to talk about your dealings with money. We love talking about money here at the Liquidity Event, but I know for a lot of people it's scary. So I sincerely appreciate you and your time, and hope to see you soon.
I appreciate you too. Thank you.
Take care. Bye. Thanks, folks, for listening. You can always email us your financial problems or questions at liquidityevent@brooklynfi.com. And you can always leave us a voicemail. We will play your message on the air and try to answer it live. You can do that at memo.fm/the liquidity event. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.